My millionaire husband gave me divorce papers as a Christmas gift, but he instantly regretted it. I never imagined that Christmas Eve afternoon could feel like the end of the world. I was standing in our penthouse living room in Manhattan, surrounded by garlands and twinkling lights, holding a gift wrapped envelope with a red velvet bow. My husband, Richard, stood across from me, his arms crossed, wearing that cold smile I had learned to recognize over the past few months. The smile that said he knew something I didn't. The smile that meant someone was about to get hurt. This time, that someone was me. He told me to open it, said it was his special gift for me this year. So I did. And inside that beautiful envelope were divorce papers, already prepared, already signed by him, just waiting for my signature to end our 7-year marriage. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now let's continue. I need to go back to understand how we got here. 7 years ago, I was a different person. My name is Layla Brooks, and I came from a family of investors. My grandfather built a small fortune in real estate, and my father turned it into a diversified portfolio worth over $100 million. I grew up comfortable, educated, but never spoiled. My parents taught me that money was a tool, not a trophy, that it should work for good causes, for building things that mattered. I met Richard at a charity gala in Connecticut. He was 32, sharp as a knife, with these intense blue eyes and a smile that could convince you the sun rose just for him. He worked as a senior executive at a mid-sized tech company, but he had bigger dreams. He talked about innovation, about disrupting industries, about building something that would change lives. I was captivated, not by his looks, though he was handsome, not by his charm, though he had plenty. I was captivated by his vision, by the fire in his voice when he described the future he wanted to create. We dated for 6 months. He was attentive, romantic, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. He would send flowers to my office, plan weekend getaways to the Hamptons, write me long emails about how he inspired me to be better. I fell in love with who I thought he was. Looking back now, I wonder if I ever really knew him at all. When Richard proposed, he also presented me with a business proposal. His company was stagnating, he said. They needed capital to expand, to hire the right people, to develop the technology that would put them ahead of competitors. He needed $10 million. My family had the resources. He had the expertise. It seemed like a perfect partnership, both personal and professional. I said yes to both proposals. We got married in a beautiful ceremony overlooking the Long Island Sound with 300 guests and a string quartet that played our favorite songs. And I invested $10 million from my family trust into his company, taking a 49% stake. Richard kept 51%, maintaining majority control. He said it was important for him to be the decision maker, the one steering the ship. I didn't mind. I trusted him. I believed in us. The first year was good. Richard threw himself into the work with an intensity I had never seen before. He hired aggressively, bringing in top talent from competitor companies. He reorganized departments, streamlined operations, pushed everyone to work harder and smarter. And it worked. The company grew. Revenue doubled in the first 18 months. Then it tripled. By year 3, we were valued at over $80 million. But as the company grew, Richard changed. It was subtle at first. He started coming home later, started talking less about us and more about the business, started using words like I and my instead of we and our. When people asked him about the company's success, he would talk about his strategy, his vision, his leadership. My investment was rarely mentioned. When it was dismissed as just the initial capital, as if money was the easy part and genius was what really mattered. I tried to stay involved. I attended board meetings, reviewed financial reports, offered suggestions based on what I learned from my family's investment experience. But Richard would wave off my input with a patronizing smile.
He would say things like, "Let the experts handle this, Lila," or "You wouldn't understand the technical aspects." In front of other executives, he would introduce me as my wife, never as my business partner or co-founder, just the wife, just the woman who happened to be married to the brilliant CEO. Our home life deteriorated too. The penthouse we bought together in Manhattan became less of a home and more of a hotel where Richard occasionally slept. He was always on his phone, always in meetings, always too busy for the life we had planned together. We stopped having dinner together, stopped taking vacations, stopped talking about anything that mattered. I felt like I was living with a stranger who happened to share my last name. I told myself it was temporary, that once the company stabilized, we would reconnect, that his obsession with success would fade and he would remember why he married me in the first place. I made excuses for him when he missed my birthday, when he forgot our anniversary, when he chose a business dinner over my father's retirement party. I kept believing that the man I fell in love with was still in there somewhere, just buried under stress and ambition. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday in September when my world started to crumble. I was having lunch with an old college friend, Sophie, at a cafe near Central Park. She was telling me about her new job when her expression suddenly changed. She was looking past me toward the window and her face went pale. She asked me if Richard was working late tonight. I said yes, he had a dinner meeting with potential investors. She got quiet, then reached across the table and took my hand. She told me she saw Richard 2 nights ago at a restaurant in Soho. He was with a woman, a younger woman with auburn hair and a designer dress. They were holding hands across the table. They were kissing. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I told Sophie she must have been mistaken. Richard would never do that. We had problems, sure, but he would never cheat. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. She had taken it because she couldn't believe it either. And there he was, my husband, with his lips on another woman's lips, looking happier than I had seen him in years. I left the cafe in a daze. I called Richard, but he didn't answer. I texted him asking when he would be home. He replied 3 hours later saying he would be working until midnight. I knew he was lying. For the first time in our marriage, I knew with absolute certainty that my husband was a liar. I hired a private investigator. I hated myself for it, but I needed to know the truth. 2 weeks later, I had my answer. The woman's name was Jessica Stone. She was 30 years old, the company's director of marketing. She had been with the firm for 18 months. According to the investigator's report, she and Richard had been seeing each other for at least 6 months. They met at hotels during lunch breaks. They went to restaurants outside the city where they thought no one would recognize them. They were careful, but not careful enough. I confronted Richard on his Sunday morning. He denied it at first, called me paranoid, said I was letting stress get to me. Then I showed him the photos, dozens of them. Him and Jessica entering hotels, leaving restaurants, in his car with her head on his shoulder. His face went from denial to anger in seconds. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. Instead, he blamed me. He said I had become boring, that I didn't understand the pressure he was under, that Jessica understood him in ways I never could because she was part of his world, his success, his daily life. He said if I had been a better wife, more supportive, more present in the business, he never would have needed to look elsewhere. He turned his betrayal into my failure, and somehow, for a moment, I almost believed him. But then I remembered who I was. I remembered that I didn't just give Richard money, I gave him opportunity. I gave him trust. I gave him 7 years of my life. And he thanked me by sleeping with an employee and then blaming me for his choices. The sadness I felt transformed into something else, something harder, something colder. I decided I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I walked into the company headquarters at 9 in the morning, wearing my best suit and carrying my briefcase. The receptionist looked surprised to see me. I rarely came to the office. But I was on the board of directors. I was a major shareholder. I had every right to be there. I took the elevator to the 5th floor where the marketing department was located. I walked straight to Jessica Stone's office. She was at her desk, typing on her computer, looking professional and composed in her tailored dress and heels. She looked up when I entered, and her face went white. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply told her that her employment was terminated effective immediately. I said she had 30 minutes to clear her desk and leave the building, and that security would escort her out.
She started to protest, started to say I didn't have the authority. So I called the head of HR on speakerphone and confirmed that as a board member and major shareholder, I absolutely had the authority to terminate any employee for conduct detrimental to the company. And having an affair with the married CEO definitely qualified. By the time I finished, a small crowd had gathered outside Jessica's office. People were whispering, phones were out, the whole floor was watching. I didn't care. I wanted everyone to see. I wanted Richard to know that I wasn't going to quietly accept his betrayal. Jessica packed her things with tears running down her face, and security walked her to the elevator while dozens of employees watched in silence. Then I went to Richard's office on the top floor. He was in a meeting with the CFO and 2 other executives. I opened the door without knocking and told everyone except Richard to leave. They scrambled out, sensing the storm that was coming. Richard stood behind his massive oak desk, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with rage. He told me I had no right to humiliate him like that I had undermined his authority in front of the entire company, that I had made him look weak and foolish. I told him he did that to himself when he decided to sleep with an employee. He said I was being dramatic, that it was just a fling, that it didn't mean anything. I asked him if he loved her. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I told him I wanted a separation, that I needed time to figure out if our marriage was even worth saving. He laughed at me, actually laughed. He said I wouldn't leave because I had too much to lose, that my entire identity was tied to being Mrs. Richard Brooks, wife of the brilliant CEO, that without him, I was just another trust fund baby with no real purpose. I walked out without responding, but his words stayed with me. They burrowed into my brain like poison. And I realized something important that day. Richard didn't just think I was replaceable in his personal life. He thought I was irrelevant in every way. He had convinced himself that his success was entirely his own creation, and that I was just a lucky woman who happened to be married to greatness. He was wrong, and he was about to find out just how wrong. The weeks after Jessica's firing were tense. Richard barely spoke to me at home. When he did, it was with cold politeness, the kind you show to strangers in an elevator. He slept in the guest room. He left for work before I woke up and came home after I went to bed. We were married in name only, but I knew Richard. I knew his pride, his ego, his need to win. And I knew that somewhere in his mind, he was planning his revenge. He had been humiliated in front of his employees. His authority had been questioned. His affair had been exposed. Men like Richard don't forgive things like that. They retaliate. I started noticing small things. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Phone calls he took in private. Meetings with lawyers that weren't on his official calendar. I didn't need a private investigator this time. I knew exactly what he was planning. He was going to divorce me. And he was going to do it in a way that would hurt me the most. Part of me wanted to beat him to it, to file first, to take control of the narrative. But something held me back.
Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was strategy. Or maybe I was just tired of fighting. I had spent months trying to save a marriage that had been dead for years. I had invested my money, my time, my heart into a man who saw me as nothing more than a checkbook with a pulse. Whatever Richard was planning, let him do it. Let him think he was winning. Because I had something he didn't know about, something that would turn his victory into ashes. The holidays approached. Richard suggested we spend Christmas together at the penthouse, just the two of us. He said it might be good for us to reconnect, to remember what we once had. I agreed, though I knew it was a performance. He was setting the stage for something, and I was curious to see how far he would go. Christmas Eve arrived. Richard had the penthouse decorated like something out of a magazine, a 15-foot tree covered in white lights and gold ornaments, garlands wrapped around the banisters, a crackling fire in the marble fireplace, expensive champagne chilling in a silver bucket. He had even bought presents, beautifully wrapped boxes stacked under the tree. It looked perfect. It looked like a home where people loved each other. It was all a lie. We had planned to exchange gifts in the afternoon around 3 o'clock, before the Christmas Eve dinner reservations he had made at our favorite restaurant. I remember looking at the clock on the mantel, watching the minutes tick by, feeling this strange sense of calm, like I was watching a movie where I already knew the ending. Richard poured us each a glass of champagne. He handed me mine with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said he had something special for me this year, something he had spent a long time preparing. He pulled out an envelope from inside his suit jacket. It was wrapped in expensive paper with a red velvet bow. He told me to open it. My hands were steady as I untied the bow, as I tore the paper, as I pulled out the documents inside. Divorce papers. 23 pages of legal language that essentially said our marriage was over. Richard's signature was already there at the bottom of the final page, bold and confident. All it needed was mine. I looked up at him. He was watching me with this expression of satisfaction, like he had just won the lottery. He took a sip of his champagne and started talking. He said I should have seen this coming, that I humiliated him when I fired Jessica, and he couldn't forgive that I had crossed the line, made him look weak in front of his company. He said he had built an empire, turned $10 million into $80 million, and I had contributed nothing except the initial check. He told me I was just the money, that any investor could have done what I did, that his genius, his leadership, his vision was what created success. He said he didn't need me anymore. The company was stable, profitable, growing every quarter. He could get financing from any bank in the country now. I was obsolete. I was dismissed. I was done. He said Jessica was coming back, that he had stayed in touch with her, that she understood him in ways I never could, that she appreciated his brilliance instead of trying to diminish it. He said she would be by his side as the company went public next year, as they became even wealthier, as they built the life he deserved. And I could take my share of our personal assets and disappear into whatever quiet life I wanted to live. Then he slid a pen across the coffee table toward me. He told me to sign, to make it easy on both of us, to accept that this marriage was over and move on with dignity. He said if I fought him, he would make it ugly. He would drag me through court, expose every private moment, make me look like a bitter ex-wife trying to steal from a self-made man. But if I signed now, today, he would be generous with the settlement. I could keep the house in Connecticut. I could have $2 million. I could walk away quietly. I picked up the pen. Richard's smile widened. He thought he had won. He thought I would cry or scream or beg, but I did none of those things. I read through the divorce papers carefully, page by page, making sure I understood every clause. Richard watched me with growing impatience, telling me to hurry up, saying it was all standard legal language.
But I took my time, because I wanted to be absolutely certain of what I was about to do. When I reached the final page, I clicked the pen and signed my name. Layla Brooks. Clear and steady. No hesitation. Richard actually laughed. He said he was proud of me for being reasonable, for accepting reality, for not making this harder than it needed to be. I set down the pen and looked at him. I asked him if he was sure this was what he wanted. He said he had never been more sure of anything in his life. I asked him if he understood what this divorce meant for the company. He waved his hand dismissively and said the company would be fine, better than fine, thriving. I picked up my phone. Richard asked what I was doing. I told him I needed to make a quick call. He shrugged, already pouring himself more champagne, probably planning how he would tell Jessica the good news. I dialed a number I had memorized weeks ago. It rang twice before a professional voice answered. I said hello to David Chen, the senior portfolio manager at my family's investment firm. The call was on speaker. Richard could hear everything. David greeted me warmly, asking how I was doing and wishing me a Merry Christmas. I thanked him and told him I was calling about Protocol Delta. There was a pause on the other end. David asked me to confirm that I was certain. I looked at Richard, who was now paying attention, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. I said yes, I was certain. The divorce papers were signed. Please proceed with Protocol Delta immediately. David's voice became formal, businesslike. He said he understood and would notify the relevant parties within the hour. He asked if I needed anything else. I said no, that would be all. I thanked him for his years of service to my family. He wished me well, and the call ended. Richard was staring at me. He asked what that was about. What was Protocol Delta? I set my phone down on the coffee table and looked him in the eyes. I told him that when I invested $10 million into his company 7 years ago, I didn't just write a check. I negotiated terms, very specific terms that my family's lawyers insisted on to protect the investment. Richard said he knew that. He had read the contracts. There was nothing in there that affected him now. I smiled and said he clearly hadn't read them carefully enough. I explained that the initial $10 million was just the beginning. Over the years, as the company grew, it needed more capital, more equipment, more office space, more employees, more inventory. The company took out loans to fund that growth, big loans, from banks that wanted security, guarantees, collateral. And I provided that security. My family's investment firm guaranteed $50 million in credit lines that allowed the company to expand at the pace Richard wanted. Richard's face started to lose color. He said the bank loans were the company's responsibility, not mine. I said that was technically true, but the bank required a personal guarantor before they would extend that much credit to a relatively young company. And that guarantor was me, not Richard, me. But there was more. I told him about the clause my lawyers had insisted on 7 years ago. It was buried in the shareholder agreement, in the fine print that Richard's lawyers had assured him was just standard protective language. The clause was called a relationship stability covenant. It stated very simply that my guarantee of the company's debt was contingent on the stability of our marriage. If Richard and I divorced, the guarantee was voided. And if the guarantee was voided, the entire $50 million in credit lines would be subject to immediate repayment. Richard stood up. He said that was insane. No bank would agree to those terms. I told him they absolutely would when the guarantor came from a family worth over $100 million with a perfect credit history spanning 3 generations. The bank didn't care about Richard's genius. They cared about my family's money. And they were very happy to include whatever clauses my lawyers requested. I watched the understanding dawn on Richard's face. His company owed $50 million, the debt was due immediately, and he had about 90 days to pay it in full or the bank would seize everything: the intellectual property, the equipment, the real estate, the inventory. Everything he thought he had built would be liquidated to satisfy the debt. Richard said I was bluffing, that I would never actually trigger the clause because it would destroy the company and I would lose my investment too. I told him he was right, that I would lose money, but I would survive. My family would survive. We had diversified assets, multiple income streams, resources that went far beyond this one company. Richard, on the other hand, had put everything into this business. His reputation, his identity, his entire net worth. Without the company, he had nothing. Richard grabbed his phone from the side table and started making calls. His fingers were trembling as he scrolled through his contacts, first to his CFO, a man named Thomas Chen, who had been with the company since the beginning. Thomas was brilliant with numbers, loyal to a fault, and one of the few people Richard actually trusted. The phone rang 4 times before Thomas answered. I could hear Christmas music playing in the background. Thomas was at home with his family, probably watching his kids open presents, enjoying what should have been a peaceful holiday. Richard didn't apologize for interrupting. He demanded to know about the credit lines, about the guarantees, about the relationship stability covenant. His voice was sharp, accusatory, like Thomas had personally betrayed him by not preventing this situation. There was a long pause on the other end. The Christmas music stopped abruptly. I could hear Thomas telling someone he needed to take this call in private, the sound of a door closing, then his voice came back on the line, quieter and more serious. Thomas confirmed everything I had said. The clause was real. The debt was guaranteed by me personally through my family's investment firm. And if we divorced, the bank could absolutely call the loans immediately. He said he had the shareholder agreement pulled up on his laptop right now, and he was reading the exact language of the relationship stability covenant. It was clear, legally binding, and enforceable. There was no ambiguity, no loophole, no way around it. Richard's face was turning red now, a combination of panic and rage. He asked why he was never told about this. Why wasn't it flagged as a critical issue? Why didn't someone bring it to his attention when he signed the documents 7 years ago? Thomas was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the careful consideration in his voice when he finally spoke. Thomas said it had been flagged. There had been a memo about it, a detailed analysis from the legal team explaining the implications of the clause and the risks it posed. The memo had recommended either negotiating to remove the clause or purchasing key person insurance to protect against exactly this scenario. But Richard had reviewed the memo and approved the terms anyway. He said he needed the money immediately to capitalize on a market opportunity, and he was confident the marriage would last. He told the legal team to stop worrying about unlikely scenarios and focus on closing the deal. Richard asked if Thomas still had that memo. Thomas said yes, it was in the archived files. Richard demanded he find it and send it immediately. Thomas said he would, but it wouldn't change anything. The clause was valid, the divorce was happening, and the bank would be notified within the hour if they hadn't been already. He asked Richard if he had a plan, if there was any way to pay off the debt or find alternative financing. Richard asked about the company's cash position. Thomas took a deep breath, and I could hear paper shuffling, the clicking of a keyboard. He said they had approximately $8.3 million in liquid assets across various accounts. That was healthy for normal operations, enough to cover payroll and expenses for several months. But it was nowhere near enough to pay off $50 million in debt. Richard asked about selling assets quickly. Could they liquidate equipment, sell the intellectual property, find buyers for different divisions of the company? Thomas said they could try, but it would be complicated. Most of the equipment was already pledged as collateral to the bank. The office lease had 3 years remaining with a significant early termination penalty. The intellectual property was valuable, but selling it piecemeal would destroy the company's core value proposition. And even if they managed to sell everything at fair market value, which would take months, they might raise another $20 million at most. That still left them $30 million short. Richard was pacing now, his movements jerky and aggressive. He asked if they could find another investor to buy out my share and provide a replacement guarantee. Someone who could step in and take my place, restore the bank's confidence, give them time to restructure the debt. Thomas laughed, and it was not a happy sound. It was bitter, almost sad. He said no investor would touch this situation. Not now, not like this. The company was suddenly radioactive. Word would spread quickly through the financial community that the primary guarantor had pulled out amid a messy divorce. Everyone would assume the company was failing, that there were hidden problems, that the CEO had made catastrophic decisions. The valuation would crash overnight. They would be lucky to sell the whole company for 20 or 30 million at this point, and that wouldn't even cover the debt, let alone provide any return for Richard's equity stake. Richard asked about bankruptcy protection. Could they file Chapter 11, reorganize the debt, negotiate with the bank from a position of legal protection? Thomas said they could try, but it would be the end of everything Richard had built. Bankruptcy would destroy the company's reputation. Customers would flee, worried about service continuity. Employees would start looking for new jobs, taking institutional knowledge with them. Competitors would poach their best people and their best contracts. And the bank would fight them every step of the way, arguing that this wasn't a legitimate business failure, but rather a deliberate action by a major shareholder. Thomas asked if there was any chance of reconciling with me, any possibility I might change my mind. Richard looked at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. He asked Thomas to hold on a moment and muted the call. He said my name softly, almost pleading. He asked if we could talk about this, really talk, figure out a solution that worked for both of us. I told him we were talking. This was the conversation. This was the solution. He unmuted the call and told Thomas there was no chance of reconciliation. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he needed to start making preparations. He would notify the executive team immediately. They would need to hold an emergency board meeting, probably tonight or tomorrow morning. They would need to engage crisis management consultants, restructuring attorneys, maybe a bankruptcy specialist. They would need to prepare communications for employees, customers, investors. This was going to get ugly very quickly. Richard ended the call. His phone immediately started ringing again. He looked at the screen and his face somehow went even paler. It was Marcus Phelps, his personal attorney, the man who had handled all of Richard's legal affairs for the past decade. Richard answered with a shaking hand and put it on speaker without asking me if that was okay. I didn't care anymore. Let him hear everything. Let him understand the full scope of what was happening. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. He said he had just received a call from David Chen's office, notifying him that the relationship stability covenant had been triggered. He said he was pulling up the shareholder agreement now, reviewing the terms, trying to understand the full implications. Richard interrupted him, asking if there was any way to fight this, any legal angle they could use to delay or prevent the acceleration of the debt. Marcus was silent for almost a full minute. I could hear him typing, could hear pages turning, could hear the sound of someone who was trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was heavy with resignation. He said the clause was airtight. It had been drafted by one of the best corporate law firms in New York. His own firm had reviewed it 7 years ago and raised concerns, but Richard had insisted on moving forward because he needed the capital urgently, and he was confident the marriage would last. Richard exploded. He said Marcus should have refused to let him sign it, should have protected him from making such a catastrophic mistake, should have done his job as his attorney. Marcus's voice went cold. He said he did do his job. He provided advice. He outlined the risks in writing. He recommended alternatives. But Richard was the client, and Richard made the decision. He signed the agreement with full knowledge of its terms, and now he had to live with the consequences. Richard asked what his options were. Marcus said they were extremely limited. He could try to negotiate with the bank, but they had no legal obligation to extend the deadline or modify the terms. The contract was clear. The guarantee was voided. The debt was due. The bank would be foolish not to act immediately to protect their interests. He could try to find alternative financing, but getting $50 million in 90 days would be nearly impossible, especially during the holidays when most institutions were closed and when the circumstances of the financing need would raise red flags for any potential lender. He could file for bankruptcy protection, but that would be professionally devastating and would likely result in him losing everything anyway.
The bankruptcy court would sell off the company's assets to pay creditors, and there would probably be nothing left for equity holders. Or he could try to convince me to reverse my decision, to restore the guarantee, to give him another chance. Marcus said that last option was really his only hope. Richard threw his phone across the room. It shattered against the wall with a sharp crack, pieces of glass and metal scattering across the hardwood floor. The screen cracked into a spiderweb pattern, and the battery separated from the casing, skittering under the couch. He turned to me with wild eyes, his face red, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He said I was destroying everything he built, everything he worked for. Years of 80-hour weeks, of sacrifices, of brilliant decisions and calculated risks. I was throwing it all away because I couldn't handle the fact that he found someone who understood him better than I did. I stood up slowly, setting my champagne glass down on the table with deliberate care. I told him it wasn't one affair, it wasn't one moment of weakness, it wasn't one mistake that I was overreacting to. It was 7 years of being treated like I didn't matter. 7 years of being dismissed and diminished and disrespected. 7 years of watching him take credit for success that we built together, while treating me like an ATM that occasionally needed to be refilled. I told him about all the moments that had led to this, the board meetings where he cut me off mid-sentence when I tried to contribute, the investor dinners where he introduced me as just his wife instead of his business partner and co-investor, the company parties where he would spend hours networking and leave me standing alone in a corner. The times he told me I wouldn't understand the technical details because I didn't have his expertise, even though I had a degree in economics and had been managing investments since I was 23. I told him about the casual cruelty of being married to someone who saw you as a means to an end instead of a person worth loving. About watching him light up when he talked to Jessica in a way he never lit up when he talked to me. About realizing that he valued my money but didn't value me. About understanding that I was married to someone who would never see me as an equal because he fundamentally believed he was superior to everyone around him. Richard said he never meant it that way, that I was being too sensitive, reading too much into normal business behavior, that successful people had to be focused and driven, and sometimes that came across as cold or dismissive, but it wasn't personal. He said he loved me, that he made a mistake with Jessica, but that it wasn't worth destroying everything over. People had affairs all the time and worked through them. We could go to counseling, take a vacation, start over fresh. He said he would do anything if I would just call David back and cancel Protocol Delta. I looked at the man I had been married to for 7 years and realized I was seeing him clearly for the first time. The charm was gone. The confidence had turned to desperation. The brilliance had been revealed as arrogance without substance. He wasn't begging me to stay because he loved me. He was begging me to stay because he needed me. Because without my family's money backing him, he was just another failed executive with a mountain of debt and a ruined reputation. I told him no. Simply no. No second chances, no negotiations. No pathetic attempts to salvage what was already dead. I was done being the woman who made him possible, done being the foundation he built his empire on, while treating me like I was invisible. Done pretending that his treatment of me was somehow my fault or my failure. Richard stared at me in disbelief. I think in that moment he finally understood that I was serious, that this wasn't a negotiation or a power play, that I was genuinely walking away and taking everything that protected him with me. Richard's backup phone started ringing. He had 3 phones for different purposes, and this one was his emergency line that only key people had access to. He answered it with shaking hands. It was Thomas again, the CFO. His voice was loud enough that I could hear him even from across the room. Thomas said the bank had just called him. They had been notified about the divorce and the voided guarantee. They were invoking the acceleration clause in the loan agreement. All $50 million was due in full within 90 days. If the company failed to pay, they would begin liquidation proceedings to recover the debt. Thomas said he had already spoken to 3 other lenders about emergency bridge financing, but none of them would touch the company without collateral, and all their assets were already pledged to the original bank. Richard asked about the company's cash reserves. Thomas said they had about $8 million in liquid assets, which was healthy for operations but nowhere near enough to pay off the debt. Richard asked about selling assets quickly. Thomas said they could maybe raise another $10 million by selling equipment and real estate at fire sale prices, but that would cripple operations and still leave them $30 million short. Richard asked if they could find another investor to buy out my share and provide the guarantee. Thomas laughed bitterly. He said no investor would touch this situation. The company was suddenly radioactive. Word would spread quickly through the financial community that the guarantor had pulled out. Everyone would assume the company was failing. The valuation would crash. They would be lucky to sell the whole company for $30 million at this point, and that wouldn't even cover the debt. Richard ended the call. He looked at me with something between hatred and desperation. He said I had destroyed him, destroyed years of work, destroyed the dreams of every employee who counted on the company for their livelihood, destroyed everything because I couldn't handle the fact that he found someone who understood him better than I did. I told him he destroyed himself, that every choice that led to this moment was his. He chose to have an affair. He chose to humiliate me. He chose to hand me divorce papers on Christmas Eve as some kind of sadistic power play. He chose to underestimate me, to treat me like I was disposable, to assume I would quietly accept whatever he decided. I told him I was not a victim. I was not weak. I was not stupid. And I was definitely not disposable. I was a woman who had given him an opportunity he didn't deserve, and a second chance he wasted. And now I was a woman who was walking away with her dignity intact while he dealt with the consequences of his choices. Richard dropped to his knees, actually dropped to his knees in front of me. He grabbed my hands and begged. He said he was sorry for everything, sorry for Jessica, for the affairs, for the way he treated me. He said he was an idiot, that he let success go to his head, that he forgot what really mattered. He said he would fire Jessica permanently, would never speak to her again. He said he would make me an equal partner in everything, would put my name on the door, would tell everyone that I was the real reason for the company's success. He said he would give me anything I wanted, a bigger house, more money, more control, anything. Just please call David back and restore the guarantee. Just give him a chance to make things right. He was crying now, real tears running down his face, his voice breaking with desperation. I pulled my hands away from his. I picked up the envelope with the signed divorce papers. I looked at the man on his knees in front of me, and I felt nothing. No love, no hatred, no satisfaction. Just a deep, bone-tired exhaustion from years of trying to make a broken thing work. I told him Merry Christmas. Then I walked to the door, put on my coat, and picked up my purse. Richard was screaming behind me, asking where I was going, telling me we needed to talk, begging me to stay. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The last thing I heard before the door closed was the sound of Richard sobbing on the floor of our penthouse, surrounded by twinkling lights and wrapped presents in the ruins of his empire. I am sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Greenwich, Connecticut, not far from my family's estate where I grew up. It is a warm June morning and the sun is streaming through the large windows, lighting up the whole place with this soft golden glow. The coffee shop is small, locally owned, the kind of place where the barista knows your name and remembers your order. It is nothing like the corporate Starbucks Richard used to insist on going to in Manhattan because he said small businesses were inefficient. I have a laptop open in front of me, responding to emails from the 3 new companies I have invested in over the past few months. One is a sustainable fashion brand ran by 2 women who used to work in fast fashion and decided to build something better. Another is an educational technology company started by a former teacher who saw a real need in the market. The third is a women's health startup founded by a brilliant doctor who was frustrated with how dismissive the medical establishment could be toward female patients. These companies are small.
much smaller than Richard's was. My investments are modest, ranging from $50,000 to $200,000. But I am learning to invest differently now. I am looking at the people as much as the business plans. I am asking questions about values and culture and how they treat employees. I am being a real partner, offering advice and connections and mentorship, not just writing checks and showing up for board meetings. I learned my lesson about investing in people instead of just ideas, about making sure your values align before you tie your fortune to someone else's vision, about understanding that business partnerships, like marriages, require mutual respect and shared commitment. I heard through mutual acquaintances what happened to Richard. The bank gave him 90 days to pay the $50 million. He couldn't do it. The company was liquidated and sold off in pieces to various buyers. Richard personally declared bankruptcy. The penthouse was seized by creditors. His reputation in the business world was destroyed. No one wanted to work with a CEO who had lost everything because he couldn't keep his marriage or his business together. Jessica left him 2 weeks after the company collapsed. Apparently, her love was contingent on his success, not his character. He moved back in with his parents in New Jersey, living in his childhood bedroom at 40 years old, trying to rebuild a career that would never be what it once was. Some people might think I should feel guilty about that I destroyed a man's life over an affair and some hurt feelings. But those people don't understand what really happened. I didn't destroy Richard. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. I stopped being the safety net that allowed him to be reckless. I stopped sacrificing my dignity for his comfort. The $10 million I initially invested is gone. I accepted that loss, but I kept my integrity. I kept my self-respect. I kept the knowledge that when someone tried to treat me as disposable, I proved them wrong in the most definitive way possible. I am rebuilding my life now, slower this time, more carefully. I am investing in companies run by people I trust, people who value partnership over ego. I am volunteering with organizations that help women leave abusive relationships because I understand now that abuse is not just physical. Sometimes it is 1,000 small cuts, 1,000 moments of being made to feel small, 1,000 times being told your contributions don't matter. I am dating again. Nothing serious yet, but I am meeting people who see me for who I really am, who appreciate my mind as much as my money, who understand that strength is not about domination, but about knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. I think about Richard sometimes, not with anger anymore, not even with sadness, just with a kind of distant curiosity about how someone so intelligent could be so foolish, how someone who understood business so well could understand people so poorly, how someone who built an empire could lose it all because he couldn't appreciate the person who helped him build it. There's a lesson in all of this, I think. Money does not build character. Success does not create integrity. And power without respect is just tyranny waiting to collapse. Richard thought he was powerful because he controlled a company worth millions. But real power is knowing when to walk away from something that diminishes you, even if walking away costs you everything. I finish my coffee and close my laptop. I have a lunch meeting with a young entrepreneur who wants to pitch me her business idea. She is nervous but brilliant, passionate but humble. She reminds me of myself 7 years ago, full of hope and belief in what partnerships could build. I hope I can help her. I hope I can be the kind of investor I wish I had met back then. Someone who sees potential but also protects it. Someone who invests not just money, but respect. As I stand to leave, I catch my reflection in the coffee shop window. I look different than I did 6 months ago. Lighter somehow. Freer. Like I have been carrying a weight I did not even know was there until I finally put it down. I smile at myself.
And for the first time in years, the smile feels real.
Richard gave me divorce papers as a Christmas gift, thinking it would destroy me. Instead, it freed me. He thought he was punishing me for humiliating him. Instead, he gave me the greatest gift of all, the chance to rediscover who I am without him, to build a life based on my values, not his ego, to be powerful in the ways that actually matter. The universe has a way of balancing things out. Richard learned that the hard way, and I learned something too, that the best revenge is not destruction. It is walking away with your head held high and building something better than what you left behind. I step out into the sunshine, ready for whatever comes next. And I know, without a doubt, that I will be just fine, better than fine. I will be exactly who I was always meant to be. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.